In this fictional story, the whole room is laughing at Sandra Bullock after an embarrassing moment on stage, until Keanu Reeves suddenly steps in. With one bold, unexpected gesture, he turns the joke around, silences the crowd, and shows everyone what real loyalty and respect look like. The night everyone thought it was just a joke. Let me tell you a story about a night in Hollywood that didn't go the way anyone expected. I was there, close enough to see the makeup, the sweat, and the tiny cracks behind every perfect smile. The ballroom was already buzzing before the cameras went live. Crystal chandeliers threw soft light over tables loaded with champagne bottles and white roses, and the air smelled like perfume, nerves, and too much money. Celebrities drifted past me in waves of sequins and tuxedos while I clutched my headset and clipboard, trying to look like I belonged, even though I'd only been a production assistant for 3 weeks. Monitors lined the back wall, each one showing a different angle of the room, and somewhere a director was yelling for a tighter shot on table 7. That was Sandra's table. She came in quieter than I expected, no booming entrance, no entourage demanding anything. She paused near the tech station where I stood and smiled at one of the sound guys struggling with a cable. "Take your time," she told him, even though everyone knew we didn't have any. "If this whole thing collapses, at least we'll go viral together, right?" The crew laughed, and it wasn't fake. People in my position don't forget when a star looks them in the eye and treats them like they exist. Up close, she looked flawless, but her hands betrayed her. As she slipped into her seat, I noticed the slight tremor when she smoothed the fabric of her dress, the way her fingers kept finding the edge of the napkin and folding it into smaller and smaller squares. The past year hadn't been kind to her. A movie that hadn't done well, headlines that used words like over and too old in ways that made my stomach twist whenever I saw them. She laughed through it all in interviews, but tonight, under this much light, her laughter felt thinner like glass. He arrived almost the opposite of how you'd imagine. No dramatic lighting, no announcement. One second the chair next to Sandra was empty, and the next, Keanu was there, sliding into it with that slight, almost shy nod he gave the room, as if he was apologizing for taking up space. I'd seen dozens of big names rush past us without a glance, but he stopped to shake the hand of the camera operator posted by their table, thanking him for making everyone look good. It was such a small sentence, but again, those are the ones crew members remember. "Thought you got lost," Sandra said, trying to sound casual. I was close enough to hear, far enough that they didn't notice me. He leaned toward her, voice low. "I had to rescue a makeup artist from a malfunctioning hair dryer. There were casualties." His tone was playful, and for a moment the worry left her face as she laughed, shoulders relaxing. Their friendship had years behind it. You could feel it in the quiet way they talked between camera sweeps. Not the dramatic, headline kind of love, but something steadier, made of old jokes and shared history. When the director called for a wide shot of the room, I saw them on the monitor, her hand brushing imaginary lint from his shoulder, him straightening his tie in an exaggerated way to make her smile. There was fun there, lightness, but under it I sensed something else. Two people who knew what it meant to be turned into a punchline and were tired of pretending it never hurt. "Nomination number 3, he murmured, tapping her name on the program card. "I'm calling it, tonight's your night." She forced a grin. "Or tonight I become the meme of the year, again." He studied her for a second. "You're not a meme, you're Sandra. They just forget there's a human being attached to the name." For a heartbeat, the room's noise faded in my ears. She looked at him like she wanted to believe that, like his words were a life raft she wasn't sure she was allowed to grab. Then someone at the table cracked a joke about being roasted by the host, and the spell broke. Everyone laughed and clinked their glasses. Back at the tech station, one of the writers rushed over, breathless, clutching a crumpled cue sheet. "New punch-up on the monologue," he said, shoving the pages at me. "Get this to teleprompter, we're going edgier. They want reactions from Sandra's table, big laughs." My stomach tightened as I scanned the lines while hurrying toward the teleprompter operator. The new jokes weren't just edgy. They were sharp, the kind that cut close to bone, her age, her last movie bombing, even a line about still trying to be America's sweetheart when America has swiped left. It was the kind of thing that would kill with an audience and live online forever. "You think this is too much?" I asked the teleprompter guy quietly as he loaded the text. I knew it wasn't my place, but the words burned in my hands. He sighed, "Not our call, we just roll the script." On the monitors, I saw Sandra tilt her head toward Keanu again. The band had just finished playing, and the host was walking on stage to start the opening monologue. The room shifted, all attention pulling toward the spotlight. Her fingers toyed with the stem of her glass. "Hey," Keanu said softly, his profile lit in gold from the stage lights. "Remember that first table read we did? You spilled coffee all over your pages and still nailed it." She smiled, but this time her eyes shone a little too bright. "Yeah, and now they probably have that coffee stain clip in some career in decline montage ready to go." "If they do, I'll ask for a copy," he replied. "It'll be my favorite thing to rewatch when the world gets too loud." She didn't answer, but her hand slipped under the table, and on the monitor I could just make out the way her shoulders eased, like she'd leaned into something steady. The director's voice crackled in my headset. "Camera 3, lock on host. Camera 2, be ready for cutaways, especially Sandra's table when we hit the new material. We want that reaction, don't miss it." My throat went dry. The band faded out. The host grabbed the microphone and launched into the opening bit, smooth, confident, every line landing. The room roared with laughter, applause exploding like fireworks after each punchline. On the screen, I watched camera feeds jump from one famous face to another. Actors wiping away tears of laughter, producers throwing their heads back, everyone relaxing now that someone else was up there taking the risk. Then I saw the line appear on the teleprompter. The one about Sandra. "Stand by on Sandra's table," the director ordered. "Get ready and 3, 2, 1. The host smiled, leaned into the mic and fired. The joke hit harder than it had even looked on the page, crueler when wrapped in smile and charm. It painted her as desperate, clinging someone who didn't know when to leave the party. The room burst into hysterical laughter, waves of it rolling across the tables, bouncing off the chandeliers, feeding itself. Some people slapped the table. Others turned instinctively toward Sandra's table, eager to see her reaction, the way crowds crowd closer around a slow-motion car crash. My monitor cut to her just in time. For a second, she did what she'd trained herself to do for years. She laughed. Too loud, too fast, that practiced, I can take a joke laugh that actors wear like armor. But then something in her eyes flickered. The laugh broke just slightly at the edges of her mouth. Her hand dropped from the stem of her glass, fingers curling into her lap where she thought no one could see. Except he saw. Keanu didn't laugh. His face didn't twist into a polite grin or a showbiz smirk. He turned his head slowly, studying her the way you'd look at someone who'd just been pushed too far. His jaw tightened, a small movement, but on the monitor it felt like a tremor before an earthquake. The host rolled into the next joke, the room still roaring, but at that table the sound seemed to dim. Sandra's eyes shone under the lights, and for the first time that night they weren't sparkling. They were wet. His hand moved toward hers, then stopped halfway, hovering in the space between them. 1 second of hesitation, of decision, of a man who hated the spotlight but hated something else even more. By the time his fingers finally closed around hers under the table, his other hand was already pushing his chair back, the legs scraping softly against the carpet, his gaze locking on the stage with a calm that felt dangerous. And that was the moment, standing there with a headset buzzing in my ear and a script burning in my hands, that I understood something was about to happen in that room that no one, least of all the people who'd written those jokes, had planned for. When the script started to break, chairs don't usually make a sound on that thick ballroom carpet, but his did. I watched Keanu push back from the table, slow but deliberate, every movement visible on the nearest monitor. At first, a few people assumed he was just standing to clap, maybe heading to the restroom. But he didn't clap, and he didn't turn toward the exit. His eyes were fixed on the stage, on the host still grinning into the microphone, milking the echo of that last cruel joke. Sandra reached for his sleeve, her fingers curling around the black fabric just above his wrist. On the close-up feed, I could see this tiny, private tug, the silent plea, "Don't, not for me." He looked down at her, their eyes locking in a moment that felt too intimate for broadcast. He leaned closer, said something I couldn't hear over the roar of the room, and gently covered her hand with his. She let go. His chair stood empty. My headset crackled. "Why is he up? Is this a bit? Did we clear this?" The director's voice had gone from smooth control to thin, sharp panic. No one answered. The floor manager flipped through his clipboard, pages fluttering like panicked birds. "He's not scheduled. He's not anywhere on my cue sheet till later." On the screen, Keanu moved between tables, weaving through sequins and tuxes, a dark streak cutting across a glittering ocean. Some people reached out to pat his shoulder, thinking maybe it was part of the show, but his focus never wavered. His jaw was set, hands loose at his sides, the walk of someone who'd already accepted whatever consequence was waiting on the other side. The host launched into another joke, this one aimed at someone else, but the rhythm faltered. Laughter came a second late, attention beginning to fracture as heads turned to follow the unscripted movement. Up in the balcony, one of the camera operators instinctively swung his lens toward Keanu. "Hold on the host," the director barked. "We stay with the host until I say otherwise. Don't chase him. We are not doing another can a moment on my show." Too late. Another camera, the one tracking room reactions, had already caught a side angle of Keanu approaching the steps to the stage. The image flashed onto one of my monitors. The host mid-sentence, and just behind him, slightly out of focus, Keanu reaching the bottom step. The floor manager at stage left jumped in front of him, one arm out like he was trying to stop a train. I saw them exchange words, quick and tense. The manager's hand hovered inches from Keanu's chest, not daring to actually touch him. Keanu listened, nodded once, and then did something I didn't expect. He smiled. Not the practiced red carpet smile, but something smaller, softer, the kind you offer when you're asking someone to trust you. He leaned down, said something in the manager's ear. The man hesitated, then pressed 2 fingers to the earpiece hidden under his hair, listening to someone screaming in a control room somewhere above us. When he looked up again, his expression had shifted from panic to resignation. He stepped aside. "Who the hell just cleared him?" The director snapped into our headsets. A new voice cut in, cooler, older, the kind that owned boardrooms. "Network here, let it roll. If he trips, we go to commercial. If he doesn't, we might have a moment. Stay wide." The host finished his punchline to lukewarm laughter, distracted by the shift in energy he couldn't quite see but could definitely feel. As the chuckles faded, he caught the movement at the edge of the stage and turned, already raising his eyebrows in mock surprise, instinctively falling back on humor as defense. "Oh wow," he said into the mic as the room collectively inhaled. "Ladies and gentlemen, I think we just summoned John Wick." The crowd laughed, grateful for the cue, for something to label this strange break in the program as just more entertainment. Keanu stepped onto the stage, that same small smile still playing at the corner of his mouth, but his eyes were serious. The host held the microphone between them, expecting maybe a quick joke, a playful jab, something harmless they could cut into a promo later. You know we do the speeches after the awards, right?" he teased. Up in the back, the teleprompter screen went blank. The words had run out. From here on, it was all him. Keanu didn't take the microphone right away. He looked past the host, out into the sea of faces, then over the heads of everyone to the table where Sandra sat frozen, one hand still on the back of his empty chair. The cameras followed his gaze. On the monitor, I saw her flinch at being singled out again, but this time the room wasn't laughing. When he finally reached for the mic, his fingers brushed the host's in an awkward, almost apologetic way, like he was borrowing something he'd return in perfect condition. He lifted it, the metal gleaming under the lights, and for a single, hanging second, the entire ballroom held its breath with him. Then he drew in his own breath, deep, steady, and opened his mouth to speak. The thing he chose to say. Words came slowly at first, like he was picking each one up, weighing it, and deciding if it deserved to be heard. "I know this isn't in the script," he began, his voice low but clear enough that even the furthest balcony seat caught every syllable. A ripple of nervous laughter flickered through the crowd, but died quickly when he didn't smile. I watched the control room feed. A dozen screens showed the same moment from slightly different angles. His face under the hot lights, Sandra's tight expression at the table, the host hovering with his stage smile frozen a little too wide. Somewhere above us, the network executive was probably calculating ratings in real time, trying to decide if this was disaster or gold. When I first worked with Sandra, Keanu continued, glancing at her table again, I was terrified. That surprised people. You could hear the confusion in the small sounds that moved through the room. Terrified was not a word anyone associated with him. New movie, big stakes, I didn't know if I belonged there. He shifted the microphone to his other hand, as if grounding himself. There was this one day on set we had this stunt driver. Young guy, first big job, and he messed up a take, then another, and another. I watched him get smaller every time someone sighed or rolled their eyes. You could see him thinking, I'm done. They're gonna fire me. I don't deserve to be here. On my monitor, the feed cut to Sandra. Her breathing had gone shallow. She knew the story, you could tell. She also knew where he was going, and it scared her. Sandra walked over to him, Keanu said, and instead of lecturing him, she started joking about how she'd almost driven the bus into the camera the week before. She made herself the punchline, gave him permission to be human, and then she stayed with him until he got it right. He let that hang there, the memory filling the space between them. The room was quiet. No clinking glasses, no whispered side conversations. Just hundreds of famous people suddenly remembering what it felt like to be that kid, convinced one mistake meant you didn't belong. He smiled, just a little softer now. That's who she is. On good days, on bad days, when the cameras are rolling, and especially when they're not. She's the one who will stand next to the person everyone else is laughing at and find a way to make them feel bigger, not smaller. Someone near the front row started clapping, then stopped, unsure if this was the right time. On my headset, the director muttered, "This is insane," but his voice had lost the edge. He sounded moved against his will. Keanu's tone shifted, turning more serious. I get it. We're at an awards show. Jokes are part of the deal. We sign up for that. We all say we can take it. He glanced back at the host, giving him an out. And our host is doing his job. He's great at it. The host nodded quickly, latching onto the lifeline, smiling a little too eagerly. The crowd murmured, tension easing a bit. This wasn't a public execution. It was something more complicated. But sometimes, Keanu went on, voice tightening just enough to betray how much he meant it, we forget there are people under the punchlines. People who still have to wake up tomorrow and see their name turned into a hashtag and a joke and a comment section battle. People who keep showing up, even when it would be easier to stay home and avoid becoming everyone's favorite meme for a night. On screen, the camera cut to Sandra again. This time there was no hiding what was in her eyes. They were shining, wet, and she wasn't blinking it away. She looked like someone hearing a private truth spoken into a microphone. In my life, he said, I've learned that the bravest thing you can do sometimes is just keep showing up. Even when they say you're done. Even when the box office says you're done. Even when you read that you're too something to matter anymore. The way he said too something made a few people shift uncomfortably in their seats. It echoed too many headlines. I felt my own throat tighten. I'd read those headlines, I'd clicked them. I'd considered them industry news instead of someone's open wound. Keanu inhaled slowly, glancing again at Sandra, then back at the crowd. So if you need a punchline tonight, he said, use me. I've done enough weird movies to keep you busy for a while. That finally earned a real laugh, lightening the air. He waited, let it crest and fall. But I won't laugh at my friend for still being here, for still being brave enough to sit in that chair under these lights after everything you've thrown at her. That's not comedy. That's just cruelty dressed up in a tux. There it was, no screaming, no grandstanding. Just a line drawn, clear and steady. Somewhere behind me, one of the sound techs whispered, "Damn," under his breath. On the floor, I saw a few actors stare at their hands, the weight of their own complicity settling over them. Others nodded slowly, like he'd just said something they'd been waiting for someone to say out loud. The host stepped closer, sensing he needed to take back control before the show spun entirely out of the orbit of joke and applause. Well, he said, attempting a chuckle, note to self, never pick on the girl with John Wick at her table. The room laughed, relieved to be guided again, but it wasn't the wild, careless laughter from before. It was smaller, gentler, like everyone understood the line they just crossed and were tiptoeing back from it. Keanu looked at the host, then turned the mic slightly away so his next words weren't for him, or for the network, or for the cameras. They were for her. "Sandra," he said, his voice dropping just enough to feel intimate even as it boomed through the speakers. "Stand up for a second." You could feel the collective intake of breath. The camera zoomed in on her, frozen in the moment. She shook her head automatically, hands lifting as if to push the spotlight away. She didn't want this. She'd already been the center of the wrong kind of attention once tonight. He held out his free hand from the stage, palm open, not demanding, just waiting. "Come on," he added softer. "You don't have to say anything, just stand with me." That was the choice. Hide and survive the night with one more mask, or stand and risk everything. More jokes, more attacks, more headlines. But do it beside someone who had just given up his comfort to defend hers. On the monitor, I watched the hesitation flicker through her body. Her fingers curled around the edge of the table. Her chair legs scraped as she shifted an inch, then stopped. It felt like hours compressed into seconds. Then, with a slow, almost defiant movement, Sandra pushed herself to her feet. The words she almost didn't say. Standing, she looked smaller than I expected. Not in presence, but in vulnerability. Without the armor of laughter and quick comebacks, she was just a woman in a dress that suddenly seemed too heavy under lights that felt too bright. A wave of applause rose as she straightened, triggered first by a few brave souls in the front rows and then taken up by the rest, uncertain at first, then stronger. She didn't smile, she just breathed, shoulders lifting, eyes locked on the man waiting for her with his hand out. The space between their table and the stage felt impossibly long. For a heartbeat, I thought she might sit back down, pretend it had all been a misunderstanding. But then she took a step. And another. The crowd parted without being asked, chairs swiveling, knees pulling in, like the Red Sea making way for something fragile and holy. On the monitors, the director called for a slow push-in. The camera caught everything. The trembling of her fingers as she walked, the way Keanu lowered his hands slightly so she wouldn't have to reach as far, how he didn't watch the audience at all. He only watched her as if nothing else in the room existed. When she reached the foot of the steps, she paused, one hand on the rail. The host offered his arm in a courtly, half-joking gesture, but she barely registered him. Her gaze was fixed on the top of those few low steps where Keanu waited. She climbed them like they were a mountain, each movement careful, deliberate, and when she finally reached the stage, he stepped forward and took her hand, steadying her in a way that was almost old-fashioned. For a moment they just stood there, side by side, two silhouettes against a wall of lights. The applause softened, then faded into a respectful hush. In my headset, the director murmured, "This might be the best or worst night of my career. I can't tell yet." Keanu lifted the mic again, but didn't bring it to his own mouth. Instead, he angled it toward her, offering without pressure. Her eyes widened. She shook her head slightly. "No," she mouthed. I could read it even from the back of the room. He tilted his head, that crooked, gentle smile returning. "Say what you want," he whispered, close enough that only the nearest floor mics picked it up. "Or say nothing at all, just know they're listening." His confidence in that sentence did something to her. You could see it. Her spine straightened, her shoulders found a new position, not stiff with defense, but aligned with something honest. Slowly, as if the microphone were heavier than it looked, she accepted it from him. Her hand brushed his, clung for half a second longer than necessary, then lifted the mic to her lips. The first sound that came out wasn't words. It was a shaky little laugh, the kind you let slip when you're trying not to cry. "Wow," she said softly, more to herself than to the crowd. "I did not dress tonight thinking, let's have an emotional breakdown on live television." The joke landed, unexpectedly gentle. Laughter rolled across the room, not at her but with her. It gave her a foothold. "I know how this works," she continued, voice steadier now. "We come here, we clap for each other, we pretend we're not all secretly wondering if we still matter." A few people laughed knowingly, more stayed silent, feeling the truth land a little too close. "We sit here and nod along when they say we're brave for doing what we're paid a lot of money to do, and we tell ourselves this is fun." She smiled faintly. "Sometimes it is." She glanced at the host, then at the monitors at the back of the room where her own face stared back at her on delay. "But sometimes it is. Sometimes the jokes hit a place you don't talk about. The fear that the best of you is behind you, that the world has already decided who you were and doesn't care who you're still trying to be." I felt my chest tighten. I wasn't an actor, but I knew that fear in my own low-budget way, being replaceable, being invisible, being written out of the story before you'd even finished your first chapter. Sandra took a breath that shook at the top. I can take a joke, she said. I've made a career out of falling downstairs and getting hit in the face with doors so other people can laugh. A soft wave of amusement moved through the room. But I'm also a human being. I have kids who will someday Google me. I have days when I don't feel like a punchline. I feel like the setup for a tragedy. Her voice wavered on the last word, and she blinked hard, fighting tears. Keanu stood a half step behind her, not touching, not overshadowing, just there, a quiet anchor. And then, she continued, there are people like this guy. She jerked her thumb gently toward him without turning, and the room laughed again, the tension loosening with the familiar rhythm of a tease. People who show up when it would be so much easier to stay in their seat and smile and pretend they didn't notice someone flinch. She finally turned to face him, really facing him, their eyes meeting in front of thousands. You didn't have to do that, she said, the mic catching the rawness in her tone. You never have to do the hard thing. You could just keep being safe, beloved, untouchable. He shook his head, barely, as if refusing the pedestal even as she tried to place him on it. But you keep choosing this. Her hand moved slightly, indicating the stage, the moment, the risk. You keep choosing to be the guy who says, no, we're not going to pretend that hurt didn't happen. And I hate that I needed that tonight. She swallowed, eyes glistening. But I'm really, really grateful that you did it anyway. A thick silence settled over the hall, full of emotion instead of absence. It wasn't comfortable, but it was honest. For the record, she added, a spark of mischief returning to her eyes, if anyone's career should be over, it's the guy who let him cut his own hair in that one movie. The crowd exploded with laughter, loud and relieved. Even Keanu doubled over, shaking his head, hands up in surrender. The host clapped, pointing at her as if to say, there she is. That's the Sandra we know. The director snapped into the headset, energized. Yes, there it is. That's the button. Music ready, we're going out on this. But before the band could swell, before the cameras could cut to commercial, the floor manager waved frantically from the wing and pointed backstage, his face pale. I turned to follow his gesture and saw a group of dark suits moving quickly toward the edge of the stage. They weren't part of the show. They were executives. The network voice cut into my headset again, no longer calm. Get them off. Now, we need to talk to them before the next segment. This can't keep going unsupervised. The band finally came in, late and off-cue, horns slightly out of sync with the mood in the room. Keanu and Sandra exchanged a quick look, half relief, half dread, then handed the mic back to the host. The applause followed them as they left the stage, but it already sounded different, like the cheering at the end of a battle where no one is quite sure who won. I slipped away from the tech station, heart pounding, and hurried toward the side corridor that led backstage. The moment they disappeared behind the curtain, the sound from the ballroom muted, replaced by the chaotic thrum of crew voices, walkie-talkies, and the heavy footfalls of those suits. The first thing I saw when I rounded the corner was Sandra leaning one hand against the wall, head bowed, her shoulders shaking just enough to betray the tears she'd been holding back. Keanu stood beside her, hand hovering just above her back, close but not touching, like he wasn't sure if she wanted space or contact. You really shouldn't have done that, she said finally, voice thick without looking up. You're probably right, he answered quietly. She lifted her head then, eyes blazing through the wet. But thank you for doing it. Before he could answer, before that fragile gratitude could settle into something stable, the wall of executives reached them, ties sharp, smiles sharper. We need to talk, the man in front said, his tone smooth but hard underneath. Right now, before this goes any further. Keanu glanced at Sandra, then at the closed door that led back to the lights and cameras and millions of watching eyes. He drew in a slow breath, the same deliberate kind he'd taken before stepping on stage. Okay, he said, let's talk. And as the suits closed in around them, hemming them off from the rest of us, I had the distinct, uneasy sense that the real fallout of that moment, the real choice, hadn't even happened yet.